Hi, everybody. Welcome to our September SEAL Connect webinar with an exciting presenter, and we're so happy to have Tom with us, and we're happy that you all are joining us today. Tom, just wanted to give people time to log in and get started, but thanks again for joining us. And we want to ask a real quick question. So you're talking about predictive maintenance trends from a survey that Plant Services conducted. So where does that data come from, and how do you guys conduct these surveys to get this valuable information?
Thanks, Laurie. Great question, and thanks first for hosting me today with this presentation. We do a lot of these surveys. We do 2 a year at least, and so it's always fun to present these in front of an audience in order for them to sort of look at the data and benchmark where they might be against industry. As far as the respondents go, we normally send e-blasts out to the Plant Services reader list that we've got, people who subscribe to our newsletters, because we know they're engaged with our content. We also post survey links on LinkedIn in a lot of groups of interest. So if you're in any kind of LinkedIn maintenance and reliability group, you'll probably see these survey posts here and there. We generally aim for about 250 respondents at least per survey. We find that the needle doesn't really change after about the first 200, but you know, the more the better in terms of the data points that we get. And so today's presentation will be on the predictive maintenance surveys, like you indicated. We've done that every other year since I joined the magazine in 2014. This is, I think, our 4th iteration of the survey, and we'll be doing another one of these next year.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for being with us for this webinar, and a few housekeeping notes before we turn things over completely to Tom and let him get started with the presentation. This webinar is being recorded. We will send you the link. You will get a link to the slides. So if you miss something or you need more information, we'll get the slides to you. In the email that we'll send you, we'll link to the survey so that you can go download it and take a look at it in more depth. And if you have any questions for Tom or for me or about anything about the webinars, about Plant Services and how you can get involved with the magazine and subscribe and things like that, ask your questions now, and we will answer them all at the end of the presentation. And if I've forgotten anything, I'm sure we'll get questions about it, and we'll try to answer those as we go. And Tom, I'm going to kick it off to you, and we're really looking forward to the presentation.
All right. Well, thanks, Laurie. Thanks very much. And thanks to the SEPCO team for hosting me today on this presentation day. The title of the presentation is simply Predictive Maintenance Trends from the Plant Services Surveys. We do a variety of surveys. Predictive maintenance is the one that we're best known for. We also do surveys on electrical safety every couple of years, on workforce issues. And as you'll see in the presentation, this past year we did one survey on people's reactions during the COVID-19 pandemic. We thought it was too soon to run the PDM survey again just 1 year later, but we were very aware that the results for the 2020 survey came in just before everybody went into lockdown mode. And so I've included a couple of data points from the COVID survey from April of this past year, April, May, as kind of a gut check to find out were people's maintenance practices changing over the past 18 months? How did they change? What were their priorities? So I've been chief editor of Plant Services since 2014. I still feel a lot like a new kid in the block, given how many 15, 20, 30-year veterans there are in the maintenance reliability space. It's been a great ride so far, and I look forward to continuing in this area for a good long time. I worked with the SMRP for a couple of years on their editorial committee as their chair to help steer the direction of content sharing and development. Before that, I worked for Panduit, an OEM in the South Suburban Chicago, as a content developer and social media manager. I spent 8 years working for Battelle in Columbus, Ohio, working on a lot of EPA contracts and Navy contracts with environmental cleanup, where I learned the language of risk assessment, which, given how people assess risks and maintenance, there's a lot of connections between those two fields. Also, I taught writing for a bunch of years at Ohio State, especially the engineering sections. And lastly, you know, I do like long distance walking, hiking, running projects. Feels like these surveys are a nice analog to those long projects. Anyone who wants to know about how to hike the Grand Canyon from south to north in one day, you can also hit me up for questions. So this slide contains links to some of our previous surveys. There's a PDF download, which will be made available of these slides where these links are embedded. So you can click on any of the links on this slide and go to results from any given year. We found a couple interesting things, especially when it comes to electrical safety, that as few as a quarter of respondents felt that their plant was not up to electrical code. With workforce, we're keeping a close eye on what motivates people to either leave the job or stay on the job. And again, these are previous links to some of our PDM surveys from 2017 and 2018. So first, I want to do two quick benchmarking recaps for these PDM results you're going to hear from 2020. The first recap is from our 2019 survey takeaways. These are practically truisms at this point, but it's worth calling them out as clear trends that we saw in the survey. Number one, if you're not already aware that the data you collect about your asset condition is valuable, please understand that now, because there's a lot of folks, especially OEMs, who would be very interested in getting data on the performance of your assets. A lot of OEMs we've talked to feel they need those data or would like to get them so they can stay competitive in the market and develop newer and better products. But also, you know, as you're well aware, there's lots of OEMs who offer maintenance services, especially predictive maintenance services. And some assets are getting more and more complex, where it becomes difficult to find a generalist technician or a millwright who can actually handle some of the more complicated assets. A quick note in the skills gap. Thanks to resourcing issues and such a wide variety of technologies available, there's no silver bullet to overcoming the skills gap. People wish they could hire better, of course. But what we have found is that it's going to have to be a variety of tactics that are best suited to your plant to try and overcome that kind of gap. And two quick maintenance tips. To benefit from proactive maintenance, you know, it's a good idea first to audit and optimize your preventative processes to find out what the skills of your team are, so you know what the foundation is to build up to more proactive and predictive maintenance. And also a note that preventative processes, they've expanded to include some big data analytics and especially network security basics, patching, cybersecurity awareness, things like that. That is now, teams are now treating those as daily elements of risk management and asset health. So if your team isn't already focused on a couple of those things, you should consider checking those out. The second benchmark I wanted to talk about is some data that was gathered by Dr. Klaus Blake, who runs the Reliability and Maintainability Center at UT Knoxville. He's done these surveys a couple of times, first in 2008-9, and then he revalidated the results in 2017. And this slide to me always seemed useful because he charts out what are most maintenance teams actually doing in terms of types of maintenance they're engaged in. That's the red bar. And what types of maintenance are considered best in class, you know, top quartile percent. That's the yellow bar. And it's been useful to me to keep looking at this because it's a reminder that even top quartile performers are only engaged in about 25% predictive. That's a big difference from where most people are, which is about 10%, 12% predictive. But it's a gap that's very real, and it recognizes that there's no way anyone's going to go 100% predictive. You're going to have a mix of maintenance types at all across the board. And of course, preventive is by far the most common maintenance type. What we try and do with our surveys, we try to identify, okay, when it does come to predictive, when it does come to companies who are investing in these technologies to help them reduce unplanned downtime, to reduce the delta between the cost of maintenance now and the cost of maintenance in the future, what are they actually engaged with? What technologies, what processes, and what are some of the attitudes? So I always appreciate Klaus for contributing these data to industry. And again, I offer these benchmarks and all these survey data up in general as a chance for you to reflect on where your team is when it comes to these kind of data. So our 2020 survey is the most recent survey that we conducted for predictive maintenance. We're scheduled to conduct the next one about this time next year, July, August timeframe. We're going to expand our focus beyond predictive to more of a condition-based monitoring survey. So we're going to widen our scope a little bit. But the 2020 results are available at that link, and this presentation covers some of the highlights. The first category of data I'd like to talk about, and again, these next slides are fairly data heavy, so if you can expand your slide window, it might be a good idea so you can see some of the data points here. We wanted to find out how large maintenance and reliability teams are. And you can see from this slide that it's been fairly variable up and down over the years. I did want to call out that in the last survey, for some reason, either the trend is that plants are consolidating and you've got larger teams in general, or plants with larger teams responded to our survey. We liked charting this section of this question every year. What is your primary job function? And you can see from the data here, 2014 was kind of an outlier for some of these when it comes to plant managers, plant engineers. We feel we got the temperature of the size of these teams in later surveys. In general, though, you've got some traditional titles giving way to more reliability-based titles. We know that some people are asked to they leave the job on Friday as a maintenance manager, and then suddenly on Monday morning, we know that some people come to the office and get called into Corp and find out that they've been renamed reliability manager or reliability engineer. But we also know that there's programs out there which are minting specifically reliability-focused professionals. So quick focus there that reliability engineer titles have grown pretty dramatically since 2014. And I was struck that the traditional maintenance manager role has slowly declined. And again, one of my hunches is not that people are getting rid of their maintenance managers, but more transitioning or evolving them into either plant managers or reliability managers. We refined the question to say who in your plant makes decisions on asset monitoring tools and configurations. Who's calling the shots? And again, I thought it was interesting that two of the job titles, which showed somewhat of a decline over the past 7-8 years, are still the ones who people who responded to our survey are telling us are still calling the shots. So even though there may be fewer of these titles in the plants, people do know that these two titles have the most authority when it comes to purchasing and planning. This was a check all that apply question. So choosing plant manager didn't mean that no one else could make decisions. What you're seeing here is that these are the top two choices that were available. And I'm noticing that when it comes to reliability, at least for over the past 2 years, reliability teams may have influence authority, but it sure looks like people are still routing their final decisions and purchasing authority up through the plant managers and the maintenance managers. So with this question, we wanted to assess what was the frequency which plants were engaging with OEM-enabled technologies or services, to my point earlier about data sharing, who you share your data with, who would find it valuable. In 2017, I'm looking at the largest section of that chart. 60% of respondents told us they had no plans to engage with these kind of technologies or services. That dropped down to 45%, 46% in 2018. And then by 2020, you've got only about 43% saying they had no plans, but the number of folks who are using these services, that's the yellow chart, you can see the yellow chart jumped from 18 to 25 to 38%. So, you know, we see this as something which dovetails with the skills gap, where people are getting much more comfortable working with OEM vendors to share their asset condition asset monitoring data. This next question from our survey quantifies who's using the data from PDM systems and with what frequency. And it's a fairly data heavy table. Again, if you want to download this for yourself, you can download the PDF version of the slides. But we'll call out this box first. The number of people who say they are sharing data outside the plant on a monthly basis certainly has gone up slowly over the years from 2014 to 2020. Whether it's totally outsourced, whether it's a third-party partner, we're looking at monthly rates of share have gone up. I also want to point this out too, that the number of people who claim they would never share their data with outside partners has gone consistently down over the past couple of years. And finally, when it comes to the operations teams, we know that there's best practices for engaging in operator-based care, operator-based maintenance. We see that operations teams have been gradually getting more access to these condition monitoring data too, and they're being brought into the fold as part of the wider asset care team. So to wrap up this whole section, the first takeaway from the survey, I would say, is make sure that you are comfortable managing maintenance services partners. We don't see this trend going backwards. We see this trend evolving and changing and increasing going forward. The longer that jobs remain open, the more complex assets that you bring into your facility, the more chance that you're going to be looking outside your core full-time technical team to get the expertise you need when you need it. And I think that's the important thing. We all know that people can engage in certification and training and get themselves up to speed on new technologies. But what we're seeing on plant services is that there's a certain time element here where sometimes gradual certification and training is not the best option where you need help now. So if you're not already comfortable developing these conversations or working with your teams to make sure they can have the conversations, that's one thing we'd recommend, is make sure you're getting comfortable with this kind of a relationship. So looking at the second trend, the PDM programs and technologies themselves, we're going to dive into the data of what technologies people are actually using and what they think of them. And this is probably the core question of our PDM survey, which is, how is your program performing, right? You can practically draw a straight line right down the middle of the chart. It's a tale of the haves and the have-nots. For those who are having success, success is helping them out. For those who are not, for whatever reason, I mean, it's a case where, and we do hear this, either it really works for people or it's really not working for people. So which predictive maintenance technologies are being deployed? These 8 technologies were the ones that we had in our survey as the list, as the most predominant technologies that are out there. Put a box around some of these data. Using now, these 3 technologies have stood out as the 3 that are most out in front. The people are using vibration technologies, infrared thermography, and oil analysis. This may not come as a surprise to many people because you do see a lot of information about these technologies. There's conferences for each of those technologies. But yeah, those are the ones out in front. And we do want to give a shout out to also ultrasound technologies, which have come a long way. You're seeing now ultrasound acoustic imaging tools where you point a camera at a location in your plant, and based on the ultrasound acoustics it hears, it can actually visualize if there's any, say, a leak coming from a compressed air pipe. Also, electric motor testing is still a very popular option for predictive technologies. And I do want to take a look at the column on the far right. When it comes to people who say they have no plans to deploy these technologies, it's interesting to see what people have confidence will not be useful to them. I'm always surprised at when it comes to predictive modeling software. Either people are all in or they're all out. It's half and half with that technology. And we know that predictive modeling software can help you achieve gains. Chances are that people who have no plans to use that simply have evaluated their assets and decided that that PDM technology is not appropriate for what they're doing. We asked this next question: what changes, if any, are planned in your PDM investments for the following technologies? We see a lot of folks saying that investments are declining or that there's no change in their investments. And with this slide, the point I want to make is that if you are a plant that's trying to engage with predictive technologies, if you're a plant that's trying to get more proactive, and you're feeling like you're the only one out there, that everyone else is ahead of you, that everyone's throwing a ton of money at these technologies, the answer is that across industry, at least according to our survey, we're seeing a steady amount of money thrown at these technologies, but we're not seeing everyone doing it. And you see the budgetary increases that are planned are fairly modest. The other takeaway is that when it comes to predictive technologies, these small budgetary increases, these represent a lot of pilot projects. It's advice that you've probably heard before, but it's worth sharing again. When you're trying a new maintenance mode, especially predictive maintenance mode, it's okay to start small. Use a pilot project. Try and apply a vibration sensor to a motor. Do some oil analysis on the lubrication in some of your bearings to find out if there's any particles in that oil that might indicate the bearing is wearing out. Doesn't need to be a multi-million-dollar project thrown at your technologies. In fact, the best programs start small and then grow based on successes. And when it comes to the type of maintenance approaches that are currently deployed by plants, this was a please check all that apply question. So this is our question, which might match well with Klaus Blake's data earlier on the maintenance most people are engaged in. And you'll see 70% are engaged in some kind of run to fail maintenance mode. They decided that it's more cost effective to say let an asset burn out than it is to always take a testing tool and evaluate what it might do in the future. You've got close to 80% engaged in preventative maintenance. And then you've got the spectrum at the far right there, the three last bars, the spectrum of condition-based monitoring. And again, just more than half of people told us they're actually looking at what they would consider predictive maintenance. When it comes to prescriptive, which is the next step away from predictive, the way we understand prescriptive is that the tools that you use to analyze the data and the platforms that you use can advise on what options you have going forward to remedy whatever potential failure mode you might see. So for example, if it's an oil analysis exercise, predictive might tell you that there are particles of a certain kind in the oil, which may mean a failure is imminent at some point. Prescriptive would tell you exactly what would happen if you changed out the oil now versus 2 weeks from now versus 2 months from now. All right, again, another data heavy slide. I love this question. It's probably my second favorite question after the question on how satisfied people are with their maintenance programs. What data collection methods do you currently use with your PDM program? And I am convinced that someday we will see paper-based systems knocked off that top spot. That day is coming, but that day is not today. People are still reporting they're using paper-based systems the most. I do want to mention that when it comes to wireless sensors, whether it's remote sensors, whether it's sensors that are applied with epoxy or with magnets, wireless sensors of various kinds have gained strong traction. This is even before COVID. We saw that popularity of that data collection method jump by almost twice as much. And then you've got mobile solutions, slowly growing, whether it's smartphones, whether it's tablets. They haven't superseded PCs yet. I'm not sure if they ever will, but they have emerged instead of just as a nice, interesting option into tools that people are using regularly. We also wanted to know, what are you doing with the PDM data you're collecting? The question formally is, are you integrating your PDM systems with any of the following higher level systems? And to no one's surprise, historians and CMMS systems are the top two answers, which is good. It's good to see people mention that CMMS is coming out on top. I've talked to George Williams of Reliability X, and he gave a great presentation last year at SMRP talking about how oftentimes one of the failure points in a PDM program is getting the data converted from just data you've collected into a work order, and having your PDM systems integrated with your CMMS system or your EAM, it can be key to making sure that when you do see work is required to remedy either potential failure or stave off a future failure, to have your PDM systems integrated with your CMMS, it makes that process of work order management, work order creation that much easier. So takeaway number 2, the next frontier in PDM and proactive maintenance, I would say, is data and systems integration to make sure that the data you collect is turned into information which can then be used to create work orders, which can then be used to start quantifying the cost savings and avoided downtime. All right, this is the third trend of 4. What we have found, every survey that we do, is corporate culture is key to the success of not just PDM initiatives, but really anything. Again, it risks being a truism, but it surprises me sometimes the data points that we do get when it to reinforce the idea that really the difference between the people who are satisfied with their programs, the people who are not, I think, are the ones who are cracking this corporate culture issue. When we ask people, what are the obstacles limiting the success of your PDM initiatives? Unsurprisingly, people said budget. That when you combine medium and high together, that is still the number one constraint. We don't have enough money. I also want to point out, though, that undefined financial benefits and undefined operational benefits have jumped up again to be a real issue. And a couple years ago, apparently it wasn't the case. At least the respondents in our 2020 survey said that once again, they're not sure what they're going to get, even if they had the money. They're not sure what the results they're after. That's a cultural issue. That is absolutely an issue with leadership of these programs, where, of course, you're not going to get the money to do this work if you can't identify clearly the expected endpoint you hope to get to. Whether it's reduced cost for asset care, whether it's reduced unplanned downtime, you gotta know which direction you're going in. And also, lack of executive support. For whatever reason, people are citing this as an issue again. You need a champion in a lot of cases for these programs to be on board with you at the executive level, and you can only do that by articulating what the goal is for your program and what you hope to achieve and what the time frame is. It goes back to those undefined benefits. So we asked people in a workforce survey, which of these factors would most impact your decision to stay or leave? And you look at the second row there, dissatisfaction with corporate culture. This is a survey that we did in 2019, workforce survey. More than 50% of respondents said that was an issue, and it's turned to be the #1 issue. And in a surprise to us, when we split out the results by generation, 80% of millennial respondents, and this is your future workforce. And for those of you who are millennials who are listening, this is you, and this is your satisfaction with industry. 80% said dissatisfaction with corporate culture. We've reasoned enough to go. This is a longer version of that question. What are your organization's biggest workforce challenges? You'll see finding skilled workers came out on #1. I do want to point out the 4th row down, knowledge capture and transfer is the #2 issue. People are having trouble recording the standard processes for what they're doing. They're having trouble recording the knowledge that might be walking out the door in the form of retirements. People really do want to find a system to better record that tribal knowledge. And the third most prominent answer here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows down. Communication and maintaining trust between different departments like operation and maintenance or production and IT. So people know there's an issue here that teams either are not talking enough or aren't able to talk enough with each other to get their jobs done most effectively. And I want to point this question out too. What could your organization be doing differently to recruit new talent? The top answer is the fourth row down, better promotion of training or career development opportunities. That was slightly ahead of even higher starting wages, just underscoring the fact that cultural issues plays an important role in your level of satisfaction of the job and your coworkers, and also PDM program success. So when it comes to this question, have you participated in or taken advantage of any career development programs? If people are offered the chance, 66%, 2/3 say, yep, yes we have, yes we would. How likely are you to engage with a mentor or coach? 51%, very likely. 34%, somewhat. That's 85% saying, you know, I would either consider it right away or think about it for sure. People are hungry for these cultural opportunities. So takeaway number 3, now more than ever, your corporate culture is key to future talent recruitment and retention. And I would underscore for the PDM survey, corporate culture is key to program success too. You know, the ability to communicate beyond your team to bring people on board, especially to recruit an executive champion, is so important to making these programs work. So before we go to the question and answer part of the presentation today, I wanted to add some data from the COVID survey that we did earlier this year. We wanted to find out if there was a change in people's maintenance modes since that 2020 PDM survey, realizing that, you know, starting from March, April last year, things changed dramatically and they changed quickly. Lori and I were both at the same conference last year. It was Klaus's Marcon conference at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And we saw the impact that third week of March as everyone's corporate home base started calling people home, saying, the crisis is here, you got to come home, we can't risk you being out there. We did our COVID survey in March and April of this year, and this is a summary of the results. You can get the full results at that short link there or at the long link as well. So when it comes to the impact of COVID-19, what describes your maintenance practices throughout the pandemic? 1 year after, people are a vast majority said they're still working with the same asset maintenance and the same personnel. Only 37% could say that last year when the crisis was at its height. But people are slowly returning back to normal where they were before the pandemic. And the second question, which options best describes your plant operations since the onset of the pandemic? Most are either running at normal capacity or they're still running at higher and full capacity. So there's a lot of overtime going on out there. Overtime usually means there's not a whole lot of room for bringing on new programs like predictive maintenance. This question, how are your organization's maintenance and reliability teams currently working? What's changed about the size of your team? Are you working from home? This time, June of last year, only 42% said things were still normal. It was close to half, but a lot more folks were affected. They were still working remotely. If you look now in March 2021, 60% said they're back to normal. The biggest shift, obviously, is the number of folks who had skeleton crew on site. What we can take away from this is that people have figured out what kind of COVID precautions to take, and they're able to bring people back to the plant. How would you characterize the normal maintenance mode of your plant? Reactive, preventive, or a mix? And you'll see there in the past, since COVID hit, the number of folks who are simply doing mostly preventive has gone slightly down, where people have been forced to make choices. Were you forced into being more reactive based on whatever circumstances, or frankly, were you forced for whatever competitive reason to innovate and start pulling more proactive things into the mix? So you'll see some people felt they were at a decision crossroads. Has the COVID-19 pandemic changed your normal maintenance mode? Only close to 70% said no. So again, a lot of folks are operating as normally. Of those who did say it changed, have these changes been permanent or temporary? And half of those said they're back to normal. So one of the takeaways here for the COVID survey was to find out that yes, some people are making choices on whether to innovate or not. Most people after the crisis moment have managed to return back to normal. And with this question, has the pandemic year revealed any of the following to be a pressing need in the area of asset management and maintenance? We were surprised. Look at the top two. I mean, health and safety makes sense given that we're in a pandemic, right? But stronger planning and scheduling. We are seeing a return back to fundamentals. People took a look at what they were doing before the pandemic and how were they ready during the pandemic to make changes. And we're seeing, I think, frankly, based on the number of people who are sick, who if you do come down with COVID again, you're quarantined for 2 weeks, you're not available. People are looking to planning and scheduling to help manage these surprise hiccups in labor availability. And I believe this is the last question of the COVID survey for today's presentation. Has the pandemic revealed any pressing needs in the area of human resources? Top one, better coordination between internal teams on maintenance best practices. We want to make sure that everyone inside the plant has their maintenance fundamentals understood and operating effectively. And second, look at that huge jump from last June. Stronger partnerships with maintenance service providers. It was a nice validation of the trends that we were seeing even before the pandemic. And I chalk that up to, especially this past crisis year, one of the decision points people were making was, look, are we going to try and keep hiring and try and find the right unicorn for the position? Or are we going to get the maintenance professionals that we need now to help us? And you can see a lot of folks said we need that help now. So the last takeaway before the question session is COVID-19 helped sharpen everyone's focus on labor resourcing and a return back to maintenance fundamentals to make sure that everyone understood basic best practices before they move on to newer, more innovative digital programs. That's the last slide I've got in the deck. You can contact me at twilk@putman.net anytime. Please reach out if you have any questions about this survey or if you have any ideas for articles on what your plant is doing, or you'd like to be interviewed for future articles. We're always looking out for new writers, new ideas. Best way to pitch an idea is simply that. Grab my email, send me an email saying, hey Tom, I've got this idea, and if you can give the idea to me in a couple of sentences or in an abstract form, by all means send it over. Also, there's a link to our market research report library where we do our best to keep up with these surveys and then issue them as downloadable PDFs. If you do click that link, you'll see we're trying to catch up with the past couple of surveys, but that link will remain active at all times for any reports you might want to see. So with that, Lori, that's the last slide in my deck. Ready for whatever questions you or the audience may have.
Fantastic. What a lot of amazing information in such a quick amount of time. So thank you so much. That was fantastic. Again, if you have a question, comment, anything like that, please include it in the question section in the right-hand sidebar of the GoToWebinar, which I was just looking at. I have a few questions I want to ask. Going back to the COVID survey, in your opinion, or based on some of the data that you've received, what is the biggest change that might linger even when we eventually finally get through with the pandemic, hopefully soon? What do you think might linger that, you know, people did for COVID but will continue to do moving forward?
You know, I think there's two of them. The first one is planning and scheduling and the effort on building better job plans. You know, we do have Doc Palmer writing for Plant Services every month, and his library of columns is on plantservices.com. Doc will be the first to tell you that, you know, when you're trying to standardize work among teams, when you're trying to figure out what to do when say technician A might be sick that day and can't come in and do the repair, how do you get the information to technician B or C to do the job? You have a really good work plan. And it doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be a standardized work plan that's saved somewhere in the company's resource library, so that if technician A is sick and can't be in for 2 weeks from COVID, for example, Laurie, you can have someone else fill in and draw from those same work instructions and get the same job done. That gets even more important when it comes to predictive tools, because there's so many portable tools out there and so many sensors that need to be that have magnets. Well, you need to measure, say, vibration on a motor. Well, if technician A is the only one handling those tools and they know exactly where they put the sensor on the motor every time, and they didn't tell technician B where to put it, you got to hope that somewhere in the job plan someone took a picture of where that asset is located and where the sensor was put, or somebody scratched or put a marker with a little X where the sensor goes. So we see a huge concern for planning and scheduling for that reason, to make sure that whatever resourcing challenges due to COVID come up, that you've got this body of standard work that's you can draw on to get the work done.
Fantastic, thank you. Why do you think paper is still used so much? That still is, it boggles my mind that is still the #1 way that folks are, keeping track of things. So what's your opinion on that?
Just shooting from the hip, I think it's ease of use. There's so many more steps to go look something up on your laptop than it is to go on someone's shelf and try and pull the paper down from the shelf. The challenge is that since everyone uses a smartphone, if you do have a smartphone and you do have an app which links to that same sort of paper library, there's your key in reducing the number of steps to find the information you're looking for. And assuming you store your data in the cloud, that data can't ever be erased or lost like paper. So, I've got plenty of bookshelves in my office. I'm sure we all have the report room where the reports can sit. I think it's force of habit and also just ease of access.
Okay, I know that when I'm taking notes, I can't type and take notes and think all at the same time. It's easier for me to jot things down just because that's what I've always done. So I wondered if there maybe is something about just the ease of thinking, writing versus thinking, converting it in your brain and then having to type or something. So yeah, I'm sure that's got to be part of it.
I agree, and it's the tools people know, and I mean, there's a reason paper's lasted for literally thousands of years, right?
Yes.
It
gets the job done.
It does, and I think the challenge for plant teams is that at some point there's going to come a tipping point where taking that data, transcribing it from paper, and entering it into the system, which opens you up to transcription errors. It's going to be easier to get say a system where you've got a wireless tool recording the data. It records the data into the tool. The little radio in the tool transmits the data back over your wireless network to a shared server up in the cloud. At some point, it's going to be more painful not to do that.
Right.
Because you're going to have too many errors from paper transcription. But there's a lot of folks who still want to pencil whip all the checklists, so that's going to be a challenge too.
I have my pen in my hand right now, so.
Right.
I think this is going to be our last question, but you mentioned content contributions to plant services, and I know we love working with you on content. And so for people listening to the webinar live now and on our recordings, you said email you, but are there topics or content types that you struggle more to get people to contribute, or to find people who are willing to be interviewed, or what are some things that you have trouble getting your hands around when you're trying to cover certain topics?
Well, the challenge always is working with people who share their experiences on the job, because we recognize that there's a whole level of legal that comes in when people do want to share what they're doing with industry, especially in print. A lot of facilities, a lot of organizations would prefer to keep that knowledge in-house for a lot of obvious reasons, competitive reasons. What we say is, if people are interested in sharing their journeys on how they learned technologies, if you're able to generalize your experience on the job and tell us what you were doing without indicating what plant you're at specifically. There's a lot of ways that we can that you can share your experience without legal teams being worried about what you're saying, because at some point when you're engaging with a new technology, everyone's on that same journey of learning. We also find, Lori, that honestly, if people want to be interviewed for podcasts, that's one option as well, because we keep those podcasts general. We don't try and at the most we'd say is we would focus on, we have someone from the oil and gas industry, or we have someone from food processing on today. We keep it we keep the specifics anonymous in that way, so people can share their experiences.
Okay, fantastic. If people want to subscribe to Plant Services, they can just go to the website and subscribe if they're not a subscriber. And again, if you are listening to this webinar as a recording, if you will email Tom or Lori D at sepco.com to request a slide deck, we'll be happy to send it to you. And we'll send a link out with the email. And we are going to wrap up now, Tom, unless there's anything else you want to add before we stop.
Just my thanks again for hosting me today. It was great to work with you, Lori, and thank you for SEPCO for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. It's always, I love working with you, and it's been great having you, and you're such a wealth of knowledge. And we have been sharing everything on Twitter, and we'll share some more information on LinkedIn, and we'll write a blog about this. And it's just been fantastic working with you, and we hope you have a great day and a great weekend and week, Tom, and all of our listeners. Thanks so much for joining us. And the next webinar will be October 12th. It'll be a plastics masterclass by our plastics expert, Cody Kaufman. So if you have any questions about industrial plastics applications, things like that, join us for that webinar next month. And Tom, thank you again so much. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you.